Hey everyone, Rizzo here, and welcome to the 6th installment in my Cold War Zombies review series. Today, we'll be covering the game's final round-based experience, Forsaken. But of course, before that, let's recap a bit, shall we? Perhaps the most important change made since last time was the Wonder Weapon Pass that Drew told me about last video. There's a lot to go over here, so bear with me. Starting off with the dime machines. The base damage for all variants remains unchanged, but now they can all be pack-a-punch to greatly increase their damage and ammo capacity. This makes it so that every variant is much more powerful than they used to be. Even the Nova 5 isn't awful now. Sure, it's not great, but it's not the laughing stock it used to be. The Electro Bolt is stupidly strong, the Thermophasic is complete overkill, and for the first time since May, the Shockwave can get a 2-hit kill at any round. The Cryo Freeze is still pretty pathetic though. 4,000 damage per tick when the health cap is 60,000? Okay. As for the ray weapons, the ray gun was completely untouched, so its maximum damage is still roughly 23,000, which is nothing to scoff at by any means, but I was kinda hoping for a buff to 30,000 to make it a 2-hit kill at health cap. The Ray K, on the other hand, got a massive buff. The Energy Mine Vortex Explosion was doubled across the board, taking its maximum damage from 30,000 up to 60,000. This change essentially reverts the Ray K back to how it used to be when Firebase Z launched. It can now one-hit kill standard enemies at any round, which is insane enough, but when you combine it with Ring of Fire, it deals a colossal 360,000 damage. This just barely allows it to one-shot Manglers, Mimics, and Tempests at any round. Unfortunately, it still needs about 3 or 4 shots to kill a Krasny or a Megaton, since elite health can scale all the way up to 1.5 million. 1.5 million, by the way. You sure that's not just a little bit excessive? With the launch of Season 6, and this is another one that I've been waiting for, we're coming up on almost a year now, Plague Hound changes. Plague Hounds were adjusted across all modes. Previously, when they attacked, they could adjust their trajectory mid-jump to hit the player. This led to way too many instances of a hound jumping through an entire horde to hit you, or even around corners on rare occasion. I said all the way back in my Dean Machina review that I liked the idea of Plague Hounds, but their implementation simply wasn't good enough. Now, almost a full year later, probably will be a full year later by the time this comes out, their implementation is more than good enough, and I think they're a genuinely solid enemy. And one more thing to note about Plague Hounds is that their spawn rates were toned down substantially in Onslaught. Previously, every time the game was set to spawn in an enemy, there was a 10% chance it would choose a Plague Hound instead of a normal zombie. As of the launch of Season 6, this has been lowered down to 5%, and there's now a hard cap to how many can spawn per surge.
It's 15, in case you were curious.
Our 10th and final perk was added to Cold War with the launch of Forsaken, PhD Slider. When fully upgraded, you'll become completely immune to self-inflicted splash damage, have a significantly longer and faster slide, immunity to environmental hazards like fire and Plague Hound gas while you're sliding, and lastly, upon landing from a fall, you'll create a flopper explosion, the size and damage of which increases with how far the fall was. For the last part, of course, my first instinct was to hop into a phase tear on Outbreak and see just how big that explosion would be if I came down from, a mile in the air. But unfortunately, the explosion scaling has a cap, so no mini nukes for you. With the conclusion of the Haunting event, which was probably one of the best events Call of Duty has ever had, we finally got those changes to the Rampage Inducer. Now, the device will remain active all the way until round 55. Unfortunately, with that same patch, we also got another weapon blueprint glitch, and this one just flat out deletes your weapon from your loadout. Treyarch, I know that you're probably crunched to shit with Vanguard and all that, but fucking up this feature like 5 times now is making it really hard for me to defend you. And finally, 2 new support streaks were added to the crafting table, the Arc XD and the hand cannon. The Arc XD is just about what you would expect. Drive a little RC car around with C4 and blow up the zombies it attacks. Only difference is, the Arc XD will give off an Ethereum pulse every second that kills all standard zombies in range. Not a bad support streak by any means, but let's be honest, the only reason anyone actually used this thing is to bug it out so that zombies won't path to the player. Don't lie, I did it too. How else do you think I got the B-roll footage for this review when there's no theater mode? The hand cannon serves as, well, a hand cannon. If you hit a special enemy's weak point, it'll instantly kill it at any round. This includes manglers, mimics, tempi, and disciples. It can't one-shot elite enemies, but hitting their weak points will still take a substantial amount of their health away. Plus, there's something super satisfying about shooting a Soldat right out of the air as it's jumping. And lastly, Onslaught. Unfortunately, not much change here aside from the Plague Hounds. Oh, and it's multi-platform now. Hooray! But we did get a new map called Deprogram, which sees players going through the mind of Russell Adler after being brainwashed by Stitch. This map is a weird fucking fever dream, and I love it. I'll say the exact same thing I said about Break On Through, but Treyarch, do more weird shit like this. Also, Adler Rock. And that's it. Not as many changes as the last time, but that's to be expected. As the season of content for Cold War draws to a close, more and more employees get pulled to start work on the studio's next project. But the changes we did get were really nice. So with that, let's finally dive into the finale of Cold War Zombies, Forsaken. Starting off with the good, what better place to start than, well, the very beginning. As soon as you load into Forsaken, you'll notice that rounds don't flow normally. Instead, they're on a timer, and the zombie spawns are unlimited during this time. The game will continue like this until you take the teleporter into the test site. So depending on your style of play, you can either leave the spawn room immediately and play the match just like normal, or you can try spending an extended time in the spawn room to build up points and other resources so that you can get a head start on your match progression. And if you're a complete fucking nutcase, the Rampage Inducer is right there too. To support this style of play, there's all sorts of utilities in the spawn. An Ivan arsenal to purchase armor and weapon upgrades, a crafting table for equipment, and of course, death perception. That last point is particularly important because of the early game benefits the perk provides, what with its 20% increase to salvage gains. They clearly knew what they were doing when they put this one here. While The Darkest Shore attempted to have a slightly different opening, this is a true return to Moon's iconic starting room gameplay that I loved so much. Only kept me waiting, what, 10 years now? Good things come to those who wait, I suppose. Continuing on, we have the rest of the map's initial setup. Forsaken's process to setting up the map is a very linear point A to point B affair, but on this little journey throughout the map, the player is introduced to every unique feature and location it has to offer. As soon as you open the first gate after going through the teleporter from spawn, you'll see that the zipline mechanic is back from Mauer Der Toten. As you move on, you'll find that the map isn't connected through normal map design, but instead is segmented into 4 main areas connected by teleporters throughout the facility. Then comes a part where you need to fix up a teleporter. To do this, the game directs you to 4 different locations in America Town, which not only helps you move forward, but subtly shows you where everything important in that area is. When the game tells you to search the area, your first instinct is to follow said instructions, and by doing this, the game pushes you in the right direction to uncover some of its unique features, like the arcade games. And finally, right before the end of your setup, you're introduced to this map's new baddie, the Abomination. The Abomination is very reminiscent of Black Ops 3's Margwas. It can still swipe at the player and bite them if they get too close, but it has a few new attacks up its non-existent sleeves. Replacing the Margwa slam attack are a Raging Bull-esque charge and a ranged laser beam that will, weirdly enough, actually kill off zombies it hits instead of respawning them like normal. I cannot tell you how frustrating this is sometimes. Both of these attacks have very obvious tells, so it's not like you're gonna get rolled by these things with no warning. If it hits you, it's your fault, which is great. That's how all special enemies should be designed. As for its defense, like a Margwa, its skin is incredibly bullet resistant, but whenever it opens up one of its mouths, it's super vulnerable to all forms of damage. And if you don't feel like waiting for La Creatura to open its mouth, you can actually still damage it a little bit, unlike a Margwa which was invincible unless you shot it in the mouth. If you're super hard-headed, you can even kill an Abomination without damaging a single one of its heads. Funnily enough, there's actually a seasonal challenge for doing exactly that. And one more thing worth mentioning, they're huge fans of Ethereum crystals.
Red pill, blue pill.
Okay, I say red pill.
Okay, he goes, he eats it. Anyways, he goes, bye-bye.
Moving on, we have the map's new wonder weapon, the Crystal Axe. Obtainable through a small side quest, the mystery box, or the trial computer, Sparagmos' Crystal Axe is a true Aether wonder weapon. The rest of Cold War's wonder weapons were clearly going for a more science-based, realistic approach like Black Ops 1 and World War II. But Forsaken gleefully dips its toes back into the Blundell era of fantasy weapons and gives us an SMG battle axe hybrid that runs off of pure Ethereum. And god damn is it awesome. The Crystal Axe has 3 different yet equally devastating attacks. The first is a double slash that functions similarly to Chaos's Hammer of Valhalla, in that it can hit multiple enemies at once, and kills with the melee will slowly replenish your armor. A Pack 3 Crystal Axe can melee kill normal zombies at any round with a single press of the melee button, provided that both swipes actually hit, of course. The second form is an SMG with the passive ability to create super combine explosions straight out of Halo. When firing, occasionally a crystal will slow down a zombie and a mist will start coming off of them. Shooting that target again will create said super combine and wipe out an entire horde at any round. The last attack is a throwable scythe that will boomerang back to the player, dealing heavy damage to anything it comes into contact with on the way. You can also hold the ADS button down to keep the scythe spinning in one spot for a short amount of time. This is super useful for when you're trying to hold down a choke point, or you just need to put something between you and the zombies while you revive a teammate. The best part though, is that all of these different attacks have a symbiotic relationship with one another. Kills with one attack can drop crystals that replenish ammo for another. The game is actively encouraging you to take advantage of everything this weapon has to offer, and I am all for it. It's like you put the Hammer of Valhalla, Chakrams of Vengeance, an SMG, and a little touch of Needler into a blender, and out came this, if you'll pardon the pun, wonderful weapon. I still think that the Ray K has it beat in terms of pure consistency, what with it being able to wipe out an entire horde at any time with its vortex explosion. But as Eat My Diction put it back in his War School videos,
but the point isn't just to be effective, soldier.
Style points go a long way in zombies. And one last gameplay element I want to talk about, the side Easter eggs. Like Mauer Der Toten, Forsaken features a plethora of useful side Easter eggs to uncover. There's the Target's Easter egg that instantly upgrades the rarity of your weapon, Ronald Reagan's pizza delivery, the arcade games, the Arc XD race, Bubby's funny little dance, and last but certainly not least, a mannequin Easter egg that rewards the players with all perks in the game. This is the kind of jump I was hoping for after Mauer Der Toten. Not only are all these Easter eggs fun and have a lot of charm to them, but there's a ton of them, and most of them are super useful.
Moving on from gameplay, let's talk narrative. Being the closing chapter of Cold War, there was a lot riding on this one. There have been so many little story threads started throughout due to the, frankly, overwhelming amount of intel in this game. And I'm happy to say that Forsaken met my expectations, and then some. Forsaken takes place only a few months after the events of Mauer Der Toten, but a lot has happened in that time. Omega used Valentina as a martyr to even further demonize Requiem in the eyes of the Soviets. Maxis has awakened to all sorts of powers thanks to the director's questionable methods. Peck and his lackeys have been hard at work finding out how to secure and weaponize the Forsaken, and Maxis and Grey have become really close friends. Yep, just friends. Nothing more.
Thank you for everything, Liz. You've been a good friend. More than a friend.
My fucking god, these bitches gay. Good for them. Good for them. As for our role in this story, we touch down just as Omega brings Zykov home, and to literally nobody's surprise, Zykov reveals himself to be the Forsaken. I'm actually fairly certain that even Treyarch knew that this reveal wouldn't surprise people, so in a nice subversion of expectations, this cutscene isn't saved for the last minute like it normally would be. Instead, it's actually the inciting incident, and the rest of the quest revolves around dealing with the Forsaken. Throughout the quest, there's a lot of real-time radios that can be activated to see how the cast is dealing with the situation at hand. Think the Shadow Man and Monty wisps on Revelations. Throughout these radios, we see that Peck seems to have something of a conscience deep down, as he actively tries to help us out with the Forsaken, despite Kravchenko's insistence not to, but more importantly, we get a ton of background on Zykov's descent into becoming the monster he is today. Basically, when he went into the end station facility all those years ago, he knew he was as good as dead, but he also knew that his sacrifice could pave the way for world peace, should humanity realize the larger threat and put aside their petty differences. But as he observed humanity throughout his time in the Dark Aether, he became more and more resentful towards them. From his point of view, they had completely squandered their chance at peace and made things even worse than they were back in World War II. They were a species undeserving of peace, so he made it his mission to break back into their world and impose his own order over them. I really love this little backstory because it adds just a little bit of nuance to your standard I want to rule everything bad guy. He's not doing it purely because he loves power. Sure, that's a little part of it. He's doing it because he's angry at the species that sent him to die. Since they just kept fighting and using each other to fulfill their own agendas, he feels like his sacrifice all those years ago meant nothing. Of course he'd be angry at them. Plus, 400 years in the Dark Aether? Yeah, that'd fuck anyone up. So, we have a great setup and tons of intriguing new lore, but the most important aspect of a season finale is, of course, how it all wraps up. After Maxis sacrifices herself to defeat the Forsaken, and Requiem contains it in Peck's weird Sophia-looking container. The Sophia container, by the way, they just not gonna mention that? Alright, we see the director put the final steps of his plan into motion. Because Maxis isn't around to interfere anymore, he's able to shut down Requiem and order the officers on site to arrest the 4 commanders that helped us throughout the story. Afterwards, the strike team touches down with Raptor 1, only to be immediately taken into custody at gunpoint. With everything out of his way, the director steps back from his monitors and heads out of his office. But not before turning around one last time to reveal Edward Richtofen, the least surprising reveal on the planet. But what I love about this, even though I saw it coming from like 3 maps ago, is that they don't overplay the reveal. There isn't any wink to the camera moment or pandering line of dialogue that references the old story. Nothing. He just looks back into his office with a satisfied smile on his face and closes the door. It's perfect. We then cut to 5 years in the future, where a wanderer looks to rent a boat from a fisherman in Japan. This wanderer is revealed to be none other than resident shithead Dr. Peck, who reveals that he's looking for
some old friends.
For whatever problems I end up having with this map, I can't deny just how well its narrative came together in the end. Not only is the choice of music absolutely perfect, because A, it's just a great song, and B, it's kind of a meta thing. Treyarch knows that after Chaos, people are probably a bit worried about getting invested in another story, lest it be cancelled instantly. So of course, they picked the song that literally says, "We'll meet again." And the ending answers just enough of our questions to keep us satisfied, but leaves enough unanswered to keep us theorizing and eager to see what comes next. Questions like, what exactly is Project Janus? How much of his old life does Richtofen actually remember? What kind of shenanigans is Peck up to in Japan? He points to the exact spot on the map that Maxis and Ravenov sent his inversion warheads to back in Operatia Anversia. So he's clearly planning something big. There is a ton to look forward to in the next chapter, that Treyarch seems very confident that they're getting, judging by that end card. And you know what? I can't wait to see what they've got in store for us. With the good covered, let's cap this part off with some nice little details real quick. When starting the scripted Abomination encounter, it counts as a normal zombie, meaning that if you kill off all other enemies to focus on it, the round won't progress. The lockdown cutscene can be skipped. Like the Pegasus flight in Ancient Evil, it's a super cool cutscene, but after a couple times, I get it, you know? After the lockdown cutscene, your radiation timer is reset, so you don't instantly start taking damage when you regain control of your character. The snow globe model on Richtofen's desk is actually the one used in the Zombies Chronicle story trailer. Does this have any story significance? No. Is it a cute little Easter egg? Absolutely. The piece of music used for Peck's reveal is actually a really clever bit of reuse. It's a track from Blood of the Dead titled Richtofen Again. The perfect track to use from a meta sense since we just saw Richtofen again.
Starting off with the bad, we have the most important pillar to any good zombies experience, the map design. You see what I did there? I used the script from last time, but prefaced it with the bad. Awesome. Oh man, this one kinda hurts. Up to this point, Cold War has been nothing but bangers in terms of map design. In my humble opinion, of course. Even though they were comprised largely of geometry from campaign or multiplayer maps, things still flowed remarkably well. But it was only a matter of time until this just didn't work anymore. Forsaken is that map. While the initial progression is very solid and does a great job of introducing the player to what it has to offer, the actual map design is a haphazardly thrown together mess that clearly wasn't adjusted properly to house zombies. What do I mean by this? Well, there's tons of areas where the spawning feels like an afterthought. In many maps throughout all of the Zombies games, there's logic and restraint exercised to where the zombie spawns are placed. Select windows and doors are broken so that they can come in. But for the most part, there's not too many of them as to not overwhelm the player. Forsaken, on the other hand, feels like they took the red light, green light geometry, saw there was a window or a door and said, okay, we gotta put a spawner here at every single one. There is no flow to where these things come from. They're just flooding out of every nook and cranny, and it feels like they didn't have the time to properly balance this. Honestly, I feel like I'm playing a Black Ops 4 map with how quickly these things respawn after you kill them or transition areas. Now, to be fair, there is a slight possibility that this was the entire point, to have the player feel constantly overwhelmed by the undead. But my next point makes me think it's the former, and that is the map flow. Sadly, this map has absolutely zero proper flow due to every area being segmented. This is something that has subconsciously bothered me about zombies for a long time, but I can never really quantify it until this map. Using teleporters, jump pads, or zip lines to chain areas together instead of naturally connecting them with actual map design just feels lazy, especially when there's no narrative reason for it. Starting in Hangar 18 only to teleport to the fucking moon? Yeah, that is completely fine with me. Teleporting inside a building that's literally less than 100 yards away? Come on. You could have easily moved this area closer and just changed it so that instead of waiting for a teleporter to warm up, you had to wait for a locked door to open that led into the Juggernaut room. If you had the time to do that, of course, because a lot about this map just screams crunch. This might be just a me thing, but I can't shake the feeling that they designed a bunch of areas, which aren't necessarily bad on their own, just a bit too chaotic. But instead of actually taking the time to connect them all, they said, okay, throw a couple zip lines and teleporter scriptables on the map and call it a day. We have like 15 minutes to get this map out the door before Activision pulls us to work on Vanguard. One more thing I want to bring up about the map design is that if you actually go back and play Red Light, Green Light, and just kind of look over it with a zombie's point of view in mind, it's even more baffling as to how this map came out. Because on its own with no tweaking, there's parts of this mission that flow better than the zombies version. Like right here, this area has a door that links into the back of the arcade, so with just a small amount of tweaking, you could link up fuel processing, the guard tower, the arcade, and by extension, any town, without having to kill the flow with teleporters and zip lines. Or let's go even further, the spawn room. At the very end of the mission, you actually go up a ramp where Juggernaut is in Forsaken to an outside area. Again, with just a little bit of tweaking, the spawn room and main street link up without any flow interruption. Now, here's the thing. The people at Treyarch aren't stupid. They do this for a living. And the previous round-based maps of Cold War prove that they can still make maps that flow really well. So if I thought of these improvements, chances are they did too, which means that in all likelihood, they were probably forced into placing teleporters and zip lines all over the place, because to achieve these changes, you would admittedly have to take some time to shuffle the level geometry, lighting, effects, scripts, and all sorts of things to make this a reality. And that was time that, judging by the rest of the map and by how little content Vanguard launched with, they probably didn't have the time to do this. If this is indeed what happened, does it make the final product any less disappointing to play? No, but it does make me feel for the developers behind the scenes, and it makes me try to be a bit more understanding of the situation they were placed in. Now you may be saying, okay Rizzo, you're giving them way too much leeway. But think about it, how many stories have you heard from disgruntled Treyarch employees, or any of the studios actually, about how Activision fucked their vision into the ground? With that in mind, does it really make my hypothesis all that unbelievable? Now, moving on from conspiracy theories, let's talk about the special enemies. Almost every special enemy in Cold War makes an appearance here. The only ones that don't are the Megatons and the Hellhounds. But unlike Mauer Der Toten, where they were all limited to little cameo appearances, these guys can all spawn alongside normal zombies. Forsaken suffers from every problem Mauer Der Toten had, and amplifies it to a much greater level. Now, I want to stress something. This special enemy spam does not make the experience more difficult. I'm not the greatest player on the planet, but I can deal with this just fine, and I'm sure most of you can too. The problem is that it's annoying. You can potentially have 4 different ranged attacks thrown at you at the same time. The Abomination's Laser Blast, the Electric Bolt of a Tempest, the Plasma Cannon of a Mangler, and the Life Drain attack of a Disciple. Pile this on top of the plethora of normal zombies, 2 different types of armored zombies, and tormentors, and the fuck spawn points, and... Again, it's not hard, just obnoxious. Speaking of obnoxious, the special enemy spawn points. Remember how I said I didn't like that one Wonderfizz spawn in Mauer? Well, there's a ton of that in this map. It's not all that uncommon that you'll have a Mangler pop out of the ground right in front of you while you're trying to go up some stairs, or have a Disciple materialize in your path as you try to squeeze through a choke point. I genuinely don't know why Treyarch decided to go for this approach instead of what they had with Die Maschine in Firebase Z, where specials and elites would spawn in outside the map with a global sound cue so you could actually have a moment to prepare. The Abominations are particularly bad with this too. They can materialize right in front of you as you exit a portal, which is always just fantastic. Moving on from the gameplay, we have the lack of identity. After Mauer Der Toten, I was convinced that Treyarch had finally solved their identity issue. That map may have used campaign geometry as a base, but it had a much different feel to it. It was dark and stormy, and it really felt like some bad shit went down before we got there. And of course, there was our good buddy Klaus, who, I'm glad he's a robot, because if he had a human spine, it would have disintegrated under the weight he was carrying on his back. But unfortunately, with Forsaken, Treyarch hasn't just gone back on the progress made in Mauer, but have somehow managed to create a map more devoid of personality than even Die Maschine. Now, to be fair, it's still not as bad as Outbreak or Onslaught in this regard, but I give those a pass because the whole gimmick there is, whoa, zombies on multiplayer maps. Ain't that interesting? As for the round-based maps, Die Maschine had the Dark Aether, Firebase Z had a complete mood change from the bright and sunny vibe of Firebase Ripcord, Mauer Der Toten was set during an active citywide outbreak, had the previously mentioned Klaus, the Cerberuses, Cerberi that talk to you, and of course, the End Station lab hidden beneath the city. Forsaken has nothing. Many claim that the inclusion of things like America Town, Burger Town, and Bubby helped give this map personality, but I completely disagree. Maybe it's because I played the campaign, but when I play this map, I don't see Forsaken. I see red light, green light with some blood decals and a couple Ethereum plants. There's nothing to this map outside of a couple new assets like the Forsaken's model that's unique. And I'm not just trying to be a contrarian when I say this either. I tried to find something that helps this experience stand out from red light, green light, but there's just nothing. Except maybe the arcade games. Like, the Noct one is super cool, but that's about it. And with the unfortunately long list of bad things wrapped up, let's lighten the mood with some nitpicks. In the Lockdown IGC, the slide on Kravchenko's 1911 doesn't actually move when he fires. Also, why is he using a 1911? There's a fully modeled Makarov in the game already, just begging to be used. In the map's loading movie, you can actually see floating zombie eye glows, but no models. This was likely done to get a clean shot of the map for the movie. Why they didn't just turn off AI spawning through the command console and then record the shot? I couldn't tell ya.
A blood decal in any town is Z-fighting. In the video store, the comedy and drama sections are filled with action films. The cheeseburgers in Burger Town are floating above the counter. The ethereal plane that appears after the Forsaken reveal IGC doesn't have proper fall off, so it looks like its material doesn't tile properly.
In the boss arena, the cube maps don't show the container used to contain the Forsaken, leading to an inaccurate reflection of the arena. Call of Duty doesn't normally utilize real-time reflections because of how taxing it is on the rig, so instead projects static screenshots onto reflective surfaces called cube maps. Initially, I thought this was an oversight, but thanks to clarification from a friend, it turns out that during the reflection baking process, most, if not all, dynamic entities are skipped. This leads to things like the Forsaken container and wall buys not appearing in reflections. So, overall, Forsaken offers an incredibly satisfying ending to Cold War's narrative and the strongest cinematic presentation of Dark Aether, but when it comes down to just about everything else, it's an unpolished, unfinished mess. The map layout is the weakest in Cold War by a long shot, and the over-reliance on teleporters and ziplines to bridge the distance between areas feels like a product of time constraints rather than genuine creativity. On top of that, you have the special enemy spawn pool, which is completely out of control in this map. There's also the lack of its own identity and an overall garish look, which doesn't really help things. It's a shame that I have to be so critical of this, because there's a ton of good stuff here too. The map's wonder weapon is one of the most fun, inventive weapons we've ever seen in zombies. The spawn room's timed gameplay is a wonderful little callback to Moon, and even though the way they're connected sucks, some of these individual areas are fun enough to play in. But what's more concerning about Forsaken and Cold War zombies in general is what it represents for the future of zombies. Whether you love this game like myself or hate it, it's undeniable that it was clearly rushed as shit in many areas, and a ton of the content that was drip fed to us throughout the seasons can actually be seen completely finished in leaked pre-alpha builds. Now, obviously I can't show these screenshots because yeah, so you just have to take my word for it, which I hope won't be too difficult. But if you can't, I won't hold it against you. If a rushed, unfinished, fix-it-through post-launch content direction is the one that Zombies is going to take for the future, well, I guess we always have Black Ops 3 custom maps, right? Well, that's all for today. If you enjoyed and you would like to see more, you can check the description to find a complete playlist of all my previous Cold War Zombies reviews. As for the rest of the video, like last time, it's just a bunch of general channel update stuff. So if you're not interested in that, feel free to click off now. So, next up on the docket is a review of Outbreak, which I'm really looking forward to because I love that weird little mode, and of course, the long requested review of Alpha Omega, which I'm also kind of excited about, weirdly enough. I've said it before, but Alpha Omega is probably the least fun Treyarch map I've ever played, and I stand by that, but there's also a ton of other positives to talk about, like the characters, lore, humor, soundtrack, and of course, my main man Rushmore. So yeah, that'll be an interesting one to talk about for sure. After that, my review of Persona 3 that I mentioned a while back. I wanted to have this one out a lot earlier, but I've been really stumped on how exactly to present it. Like, I have all my talking points written down, but how exactly do I present them in a way that flows well, but also fits my style, but is also a bit different as well? Honestly, I've had dozens of different ideas on how to approach this, and every single time I'm like, nah, that fucking sucks. Okay, let's try something else. So obviously I'm still struggling with that a bit, but hey, better to release a video that's nice and polished than to rush it out because, I don't want to figure it out, right? After that, I genuinely have zero idea. You may be asking, wait, what about Vanguard? To be honest, I wasn't gonna even buy it, but everyone on Twitter and YouTube was hyping it up like it was the worst video game ever made and it killed their families. So I wanted to see the nightmare for myself, only to actually really like it. But I'm not doing a year-wide review series on it. I made that mistake with Cold War already, and I now know how much of a pain in the goddamn ass it is to cover live service games. Because they're constantly changing, the amount of times I had a script segment finalized, only for an update to come along and completely nullify all that work, is way more than you would think. Plus, as much as I'm enjoying Daran Fang, there's like zero content to actually review. There's no quest, there's no wonder weapon, there's only 3 objectives, and there's not even a Pack-a-Punch camo for Christ's sake. That's what happens when you force your devs to rush things out, Activision. But who knows, maybe by the time Season 1 has come and gone, there will be a bit more meat on this game's bones. And who knows, maybe then I'll cover Daran Fang. But for now, I'm just gonna have some fun playing it, and maybe I'll take some notes for a review. No promises. Anyway, thank you all for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Take care.